When he was 12 years old, an Argentine boy fell in love with a girl. Both of their parents disagreed with the idea of young love, but the boy still boldly proposed to the girl. The girl later recalled with a smile, "He said that if I didn't agree, he would become a priest. Fortunately, I didn't agree." This was perhaps one of the most significant rejections in history because the boy eventually did become a priest and went on to become the leader of the entire Roman Catholic Church, the Pope. This boy's name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, but the world knows him better by his other title, Pope Francis, the 266th Pope. On April 21st, the Vatican announced that Pope Francis, aged 88, had passed away. This means that the Vatican will hold a papal funeral and secretly elect a new pope. In terms of significance, this was probably one of the biggest events worldwide that day. Strangely, Pope Francis's departure was quite abrupt. On Easter Sunday, although he wasn't feeling well, he still sat in a wheelchair and blessed the crowds in St. Peter's Square, and then took a drive around to greet people outside. Unexpectedly, the next day, the Vatican suddenly announced his death. Around 2 months ago, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, Pope Francis was hospitalized due to difficulty breathing. Later, his medical team revealed that he had contracted pneumonia and bronchitis, which appeared to be quite serious. On February 21st, the medical team stated that he was not in immediate danger, but his condition could change from day to day, meaning he had not yet fully overcome the danger. However, just 1 day later, the Vatican's news reported that he had experienced a respiratory emergency and had received a blood transfusion and high-flow oxygen treatment. Another day passed, and on the 23rd, Pope Francis showed signs of early kidney failure. The following 2 days saw reports of slight improvements in his condition, but by March 1st, he began coughing again, inhaling vomit, and needed a ventilator. After that, his condition seemed to worsen daily, with 2 instances of acute respiratory failure, requiring him to be placed on a ventilator again. At that time, St. Peter's Square was crowded with many people, all praying for him. However, considering his age, everyone probably prepared themselves for the worst. Unexpectedly, over the past 2 weeks, Pope Francis pulled through. On March 23rd, he was discharged from the hospital, and before leaving, he waved to the crowds from the hospital balcony. Following his doctor's advice, Pope Francis spent the next period in rest and recovery, rarely going out. It wasn't until last week that he became more active, even meeting with the US Vice President, and later appeared at the Easter events, which was the scene mentioned earlier. Initially, it seemed that the Pope was able to participate in events continuously, indicating a good recovery. But to everyone's surprise, the next day came the news of his passing. It truly was a dramatic turn of events. Currently, the Vatican has not disclosed the direct cause of the Pope's death. However, considering that the Pope underwent lung surgery in his youth, having part of his lung tissue removed, and that he has been prone to respiratory infections in his later years, especially during the winter, the possibility of lung-related issues cannot be overlooked. However, some Italian media have reported that he died from a sudden brain hemorrhage, unrelated to his lung problems. It's hard to speculate on the exact cause, so we should wait for the official report from the Vatican later. Pope Francis is Argentine and is the first non-European pope selected by the Catholic Church since the 8th century. The last non-European pope was Gregory III, who was from Syria and passed away in 741. On February 28, 2013, Pope Benedict XVI resigned, and on March 13, a papal conclave elected Jorge Mario Bergoglio as his successor. He chose the name Francis as his papal name. The choice of his papal name has its significance. As is well known, popes typically choose names like Benedict XVI or Julius III to honor saints from religious history, often resulting in many popes sharing the same name. Francis is the first pope to take the name Saint Francis, who was a well-known ascetic dedicated to helping the poor throughout his life. You can likely get a sense of this pope's aspirations from his chosen name. Since becoming the leader of the Jesuits in Argentina in 1973 at the age of 36, Pope Francis has been deeply concerned about the poor, a commitment that has continued throughout his life. During the Argentine economic crisis of 2001 to 2002, he organized teams to distribute charitable food, doubled the number of priests in slums, and built schools and drug rehabilitation centers. He transformed his residence into a priest's dormitory while living in a modest room in Buenos Aires. Every year before Easter, he would visit marginalized groups, such as prisoners, people with AIDS, or the elderly. Even after becoming pope, he continued this practice until his health no longer allowed him to do so. Due to his early experiences in Argentina, Pope Francis is a typical liberal. In the early years of his papacy, he focused on issues such as climate change, migrant rights, and income equality. He gained a high reputation worldwide, as these concerns seemed to align with the prevailing global sentiment at the time. He was open about topics like LGBTQ+ rights, women's rights in the church, and transgender issues, and in fact, was quite progressive on these matters. However, as the climate began to shift, he sometimes appeared somewhat out of sync with the evolving views. Nevertheless, he did not change his stance, and even in his final speech, the day before his death, he mentioned the issue of immigration. In addition, Pope Francis implemented numerous reforms within the Catholic Church. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his resignation, at a time when scandals involving sexual abuse, corruption, and financial fraud were rampant within the Church. Since taking office, Pope Francis has made sweeping changes to the power structure of the Church, suppressing a large number of conservatives and advocating for the decentralization of power. Over 12 years, he promoted thousands of bishops and appointed more than half of the members of the College of Cardinals, most of whom shared his stance on issues such as supporting the poor, welcoming marginalized groups, and addressing climate change. This earned him many enemies. The world today is vastly different from when he took office 12 years ago, and with his passing, it remains uncertain whether the Church will return to its previous path. So, what will happen next? First, the funeral. Following Vatican tradition, a 9-day mourning period will begin today. This will be followed by several days of lying in state, allowing Catholics around the world to pay their respects in person. The reason it's referred to as several days is that the papal funeral will take place between the 4th and 6th day after his death, but the exact date has not been announced yet. Unlike most popes, Pope Francis will be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major in the Esquiline district of Rome, rather than St. Peter's Basilica. Additionally, the Pope's study and bedroom are currently locked, which is unique to Pope Francis. Shortly after being elected in 2013, Pope Francis made a groundbreaking decision to forego the luxurious papal apartment and live in a small room on the outskirts of the Vatican. Additionally, previous popes' coffins were traditionally 3 layers: a wooden coffin, a lead coffin, and another wooden coffin. However, in 2024, Pope Francis simplified the requirements for papal funerals, specifying that from then on, only a wooden coffin with a zinc lining would be used, and he followed this rule. Another interesting tradition is the broken ring. The fisherman's ring is like the Vatican's seal, traditionally used to seal documents, with the Pope's name engraved on it. After a pope's death, the ring is destroyed, and when the next pope is elected, a new ring is cast. As of 2024, there are approximately 1.28 to 1.41 billion baptized Catholics worldwide, with their influence extending across every continent. It is expected that, before the new Pope's first sermon, countless Catholics from around the world will travel to the Vatican to pay their respects and witness the election of the new Pope. Therefore, during this time, the Vatican is likely to become the busiest place in the world. The period between the death of the former Pope and the election of the new Pope is known as the sede vacante. During this time, the College of Cardinals temporarily governs the Church, but they cannot make any major decisions. In the coming days, all the cardinals will travel to the Vatican. At least 15 days later, the cardinals will secretly elect the new Pope in a process called the conclave, which is arguably the most secretive election in the world. Currently, there are 252 living cardinals, but according to the rules, only those under the age of 80 are eligible to vote, so there are only 138 voting cardinals. During the election process, the cardinals are locked inside the Sistine Chapel, with no electronic devices and no communication with the outside world. Each cardinal secretly writes down their preferred candidate, and a designated person collects the ballots to be burned until someone receives at least 2/3 of the votes. If no one reaches the required majority, the process begins again. Twice a day, smoke will rise from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. Black smoke means no pope has been elected, while white smoke indicates that a new pope has been chosen. Historically, the longest conclave lasted 34 months, but the longest papal election in the past century was only 5 days. It is expected that a new pope will be elected within a month. As mentioned earlier, this is a major event for the entire world. Many heads of state have already expressed their condolences, and the first group of mourners has appeared in St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. However, due to time zone differences, it will likely take more time for the news to spread further.